Karen had always been a busybody, but today she'd gone too far. As she strode across the quiet street, a triumphant grin plastered on her face, she had no idea the hornet's nest she was about to stir up. Little did she know, the car she was about to have towed was not her neighbor's at all. It belonged to an off-duty police officer. And that officer was about to teach Karen a hard lesson of minding her own business. I watched in disbelief as Karen stomped over to my neighbor's car, her lips pursed in that signature self-righteous expression of hers. She'd been harping on him for weeks about how his beaten-up old sit-in was an eyesore and a hazard to the neighborhood. Now, it seemed, she was finally taking matters into her own hands. I gripped the windowsill, heart pounding, as she whipped out her phone and started furiously tapping away. A few minutes later, a large tow truck rumbled down the street and pulled up alongside the car. The driver hopped out, nodded at Karen, and began hooking up the vehicle. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, bursting out the front door. Karen turned to me, triumph etched on every line of her face. "I'm having this eyesore removed, that's what I'm doing. Your neighbor's been warned time and time again, and he refused to do anything about it. Well, now he's going to learn a lesson." I opened my mouth to protest, but movement at the end of the street caught my eye. A man in a rumpled police uniform was striding towards us, his face a thundercloud. "That's my car you're trying to tow," he growled, advancing on the tow truck driver. "I'd suggest you unhook it. Now." The tow truck driver's face went white as a sheet. He hastily disconnected the car and jumped back into his truck, peeling away down the street. Karen's smug expression morphed into one of pure terror as the officer stalked towards her. "Ma'am, do you have any idea whose vehicle you just tried to have impounded?" The officer demanded, his voice dangerously low. Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. I winced, waiting for the inevitable explosion. "That was my personal vehicle, ma'am. I'm an off-duty police officer, and you just tried to illegally tow my car. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" Karen let out a strangled whimper, all the color draining from her face. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from grinning. Serve her right, the busybody. The officer continued his tirade, his voice rising with each word. "You had no right to call a tow truck on my car. You had no authority to have it impounded. And you certainly had no right to try and deprive a police officer of his vehicle. That is a serious offense, ma'am, and I can assure you there will be consequences." Karen cowered, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were trying to disappear. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at her comeuppance. Maybe now she'd learned to mind her own business. The officer glared at Karen, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "I ought to arrest you right here and now for attempted theft of government property and abuse of emergency services. Do you have any idea how serious these charges are?" Karen let out a strangled whimper, her eyes darting around frantically, as if searching for an escape route. I'm so sorry, officer. I didn't know it was your car. I was just trying to get that eyesore removed from the neighborhood, that's all. I didn't mean any harm, I swear." The officer's lips thinned into a tight line. "That's no excuse, ma'am. You had no right to take the law into your own hands like that. There are proper channels to address issues in the community, and you clearly didn't bother to follow them." He paused, pinching the bridge of his nose as if fighting back a migraine. "Look, I'm going to give you a warning this time. But if I ever catch you pulling a stunt like this again, I won't hesitate to slap the cuffs on you. Do I make myself clear?" Karen nodded frantically, her entire body trembling. Yes, officer. It won't happen again, I promise." The officer's gaze flicked to me, and I straightened instinctively. "And you," he said, his tone stern. "Why didn't you try to stop her? You live right here. You must have seen what was happening." I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling like a scolded schoolchild. I was just in shock, officer. I didn't know what to do." The officer's eyes narrowed. Well, next time, I suggest you speak up. Letting someone break the law right in front of you makes you an accomplice. You understand? I nodded mutely, my face burning with embarrassment. The officer turned back to Karen, his expression hardening once more. As for you, ma'am, consider this your one and only warning. If I so much as catch you jaywalking, I'll haul you down to the station. Got it? Karen nodded again, her face ashen. Yes, officer. It won't happen again, I swear. The officer grunted, then turned on his heel and strode back down the street, leaving Karen and me in stunned silence. I glanced over at her, half expecting her to burst into tears. Instead, she was staring after the officer, her eyes wide and her mouth hanging open. I cleared my throat awkwardly. Well, I guess that's one way to teach you a lesson about minding your own business, huh? Karen shot me a withering glare, then huffed off, muttering under her breath. I watched her go, shaking my head in disbelief. Maybe now she'd finally learn to keep her nose out of other people's affairs. As the days passed, it became clear that Karen had indeed learned her lesson, at least for the time being. She kept her distance from my neighbor's car and even avoided making eye contact with me whenever I happened to see her in the neighborhood. But I knew it was only a matter of time before she started stirring up trouble again. That's just how Karen was. She couldn't resist sticking her nose where it didn't belong, no matter the consequences. Sure enough, about a week later, I spotted her pacing back and forth in front of my neighbor's house, her brow furrowed in a deep scowl. I watched warily from my window, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Karen strode up to my neighbor's front door and began hammering on it, her fist landing on the wood with a loud series of thuds. My neighbor, a quiet and unassuming man named Mr. Patel, opened the door, looking understandably bewildered. Can I help you, Mrs. Wilkins? Yes, you can help me by finally getting that eyesore of a car off the street. Karen snapped, her voice shrill and grating. It's been an absolute blight on the neighborhood for weeks now, and I'm not going to stand for it any longer. Mr. Patel blinked, taken aback by the sheer venom in Karen's tone. I'm not sure what you mean. I haven't had any issues with my car, and I certainly haven't been informed of any complaints. Don't play dumb with me, Mr. Patel. Karen spat. That old clunker of yours is an absolute disgrace, and it needs to be removed immediately. Mr. Patel's brow furrowed in confusion. But I don't understand. What's the problem with my car? It's perfectly functional, and I'm not aware of any regulations it's violating. Karen let out an exasperated huff. The problem is that it's an eyesore, Mr. Patel. It's a blight on our beautiful neighborhood, and it needs to go. I've been patient long enough, and now I'm taking matters into my own hands. Before Mr. Patel could respond, Karen whirled around and started marching towards her car, which was parked at the curb. I watched in dread, knowing exactly what was about to happen. Sure enough, Karen yanked open the driver's side door and climbed inside, her movements jerky and agitated. A moment later, the engine roared to life, and the car lurched forward, headed straight for Mr. Patel's sit-in. I let out a horrified gasp, my heart pounding in my chest. Oh no. No, this can't be happening again. But as Karen's car drew closer, a familiar figure stepped out from behind a parked van, his hand reaching for his hip. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the crisp police uniform and the stern expression on the officer's face. Karen, stop, the officer shouted, his voice booming across the quiet street. Step away from the vehicle, ma'am, and keep your hands where I can see them. Karen froze, her eyes wide with terror. She slowly raised her hands, trembling, as the officer strode towards her, his gaze never wavering. You've got a lot of nerve, trying to pull something like this after our last encounter, the officer growled, his voice low and menacing. I thought I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate any more of your antics. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. She simply stared at the officer, her face a mask of pure fear. The officer shook his head, his lips curling into a humorless smile. You know, I was hoping I wouldn't have to teach you another lesson. But it seems like you just can't learn, can you? He reached for his handcuffs, and Karen let out a strangled cry. No, please. I'm sorry. Officer, I swear I won't do it again. The officer paused, his gaze piercing. We'll see about that, ma'am. Now, I think it's time you and I had a little chat down at the station. With that, he grabbed Karen's arm and gently but firmly led her towards his squad car, leaving Mr. Patel and me staring in stunned silence. As the officer led Karen away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was relieved that the busybody had finally faced the consequences of her actions. But on the other, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity as I watched her being hauled off, her face a mask of pure terror. Mr. Patel, for his part, seemed equally bewildered by the whole ordeal. He stood on his doorstep, his brow furrowed in confusion as he watched the scene unfold. Once the officer had shoved Karen into the back seat of the squad car and slammed the door, he turned to Mr. Patel and approached him with a sympathetic expression. I'm sorry you had to witness that, sir, the officer said, his voice low and even. Mrs. Wilkins has been a thorn in this neighborhood's side for far too long, and it seems like she just can't learn to keep her nose out of other people's business. Mr. Patel blinked, his eyes wide. But I don't understand. What did she do? The officer sighed, running a hand through his hair. Well, to make a long story short, she tried to have your car towed last week, thinking it was an eyesore or something. Turns out, she tried to have my personal vehicle impounded, and that didn't go over too well with me. Mr. Patel's eyes widened even further, if that was possible. Your car? Oh, goodness, I had no idea. I'm so sorry, officer. I had no idea she was causing you trouble as well. The officer waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry about it, sir. It's not your fault. Mrs. Wilkins is the one who's going to be paying the price for her actions. He paused, his gaze hardening. And believe me, she's going to be paying a hefty price. I've been wanting to put that woman in her place for a long time, and this is the perfect opportunity. Mr. Patel winced, as if he could already feel the weight of Karen's impending punishment. Well, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. I want to make sure she never pulls a stunt like this again. The officer nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I appreciate that, Mr. Patel. And don't worry, I'll make sure she learns her lesson this time. With that, the officer turned and headed back to his car, where Karen was still sitting in the backseat, her face a picture of defeat. I watched as he slid behind the wheel and started the engine, the sirens blaring to life as he pulled away, leaving Mr. Patel and me standing there in stunned silence. I glanced over at Mr. Patel, who was staring after the retreating squad car with a conflicted expression. Well, I guess that's one way to teach Karen a lesson, I said, trying to break the awkward silence. Mr. Patel met my gaze, a wry smile tugging at his lips. I suppose so. Though I can't help but feel a little sorry for her, even after all the trouble she's caused. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his compassion. Really? After everything she's put you through? Mr. Patel shrugged, his expression thoughtful. Well, you know, sometimes people like Karen lash out because they're hurting in their own way. It doesn't excuse her behavior, of course, but it makes me wonder what's really going on underneath all that bluster. I blinked, suddenly feeling a little ashamed of my own lack of empathy. I hadn't thought of it that way, I admitted. Mr. Patel nodded, his gaze shifting back to the empty street. It's easy to judge, but a little understanding can go a long way. Hopefully, this experience will be a wake-up call for her. I followed his gaze, my own thoughts swirling. Maybe Mr. Patel had a point. Maybe there was more to Karen's story than met the eye. Either way, one thing was certain. This was far from the last we'd see of the neighborhood's most notorious busybody. As the days passed, the echoes of the Karen incident, as it had become known around the neighborhood, began to fade. The initial shock and drama had given way to a sense of uneasy anticipation, as we all waited with bated breath to see what would happen next. Mr. Patel, for his part, seemed to take the whole ordeal in stride. He continued about his business, his old sedan still parked in front of his house, apparently unperturbed by the attention it had garnered. I, on the other hand, found myself constantly on edge, half expecting Karen to come stomping down the street at any moment, ready to resume her crusade against the eyesore that was Mr. Patel's car. But the days turned into weeks, and Karen was nowhere to be seen. The neighborhood gossip mill had gone surprisingly quiet, and I couldn't help but wonder what had become of the troublesome busybody. Then, one afternoon, as I was out tending to my garden, I heard the familiar rumble of a police car cruising down the street. I glanced up, my heart sinking as I recognized the distinct markings of the local precinct's vehicles. Sure enough, the car pulled up in front of Mr. Patel's house, and the officer from the previous incident stepped out, his expression unreadable. He strode up to the front door and gave a firm knock, and a moment later, Mr. Patel emerged, a look of mild curiosity on his face. I watched, my fingers tightening around the trowel I was holding, as the two men engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. The officer's body language was tense, his gestures sharp and precise, while Mr. Patel listened intently, nodding occasionally. After a few minutes, the officer extended his hand, and Mr. Patel shook it with a grateful smile. The officer then turned and headed back to his car, a satisfied expression on his face. As he drove away, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. What had that been all about? Had Karen somehow managed to land herself in even more trouble? And what did it mean for the rest of us in the neighborhood? I hurried over to Mr. Patel's house, my curiosity getting the better of me. "Mr. Patel, is everything all right?" I called out, trying to keep my voice casual. Mr. Patel looked up, a warm smile spreading across his face. Yes, everything is just fine, my friend," he replied, his voice calm and reassuring. I blinked, taken aback by his demeanor. "But the police officer. I saw him talking to you. Is there some kind of problem?" Mr. Patel chuckled, shaking his head. No problem at all. The officer was actually here to apologize on behalf of the department." My brow furrowed in confusion. Apologize? For what? "For the incident with Mrs. Wilkins, of course," Mr. Patel explained. "Apparently, she's been causing quite a bit of trouble for the police as well, and they wanted to make sure I knew they were taking the matter seriously." I stared at him, my mouth hanging open. "They're apologizing to you? But why?" Mr. Patel smiled, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Well, you see, the officer told me that Mrs. Wilkins has been sentenced to a month in jail for her little stunt with my car. Apparently, she was also fined for abuse of emergency services and attempted theft of government property." I felt my jaw drop even further. A month in jail? Seriously? Mr. Patel nodded, his expression turning more serious. "Yes, and the officer said that if she continues to cause trouble in the neighborhood after her release, she could face even more serious charges." I let out a low whistle, suddenly feeling a newfound respect for the local police force. "Wow, I guess they really wanted to make an example of her, huh?" Mr. Patel chuckled. "It would seem so. And I must say, I'm rather impressed with their dedication to addressing the issue." I shook my head in disbelief, a grin spreading across my face. "Well, I'll be. I guess Karen finally met her match." Mr. Patel nodded, his own smile widening. "Indeed. And I, for one, am quite relieved to have this particular thorn in my side removed, at least for the time being." As we exchanged a knowing look, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over me. Maybe, just maybe, this whole ordeal would finally teach Karen to mind her own business. And if not, well, at least we knew the authorities were on our side. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood seemed to settle into a newfound sense of peace and tranquility. Without Karen's constant meddling and harassment, the street felt strangely quiet, almost serene. Mr. Patel, for his part, seemed to be reveling in the reprieve. He would often be seen out on his front porch, sipping his morning coffee and waving to the occasional passerby. The old sit-in that had once been the source of so much drama now sat quietly in its spot, a silent reminder of the lessons that had been learned. I, too, found myself relaxing a bit, no longer constantly on edge and waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was strange, really, how much of a difference the absence of one person could make in the overall atmosphere of a community. But of course, I knew that this peace couldn't last forever. Karen was bound to be released from jail eventually, and I couldn't help but wonder what kind of trouble she might stir up upon her return. Sure enough, one sunny afternoon, as I was out tending to my garden, a familiar figure came striding down the street. I felt my heart skip a beat as I recognized the unmistakable silhouette of Karen Wilkins, her shoulders squared and her chin held high. She marched up to Mr. Patel's house, her expression a mixture of determination and barely contained rage. I watched, my fingers tightening around the gardening tools in my hands, as she pounded on the front door, her fist landing with a series of loud thuds. Mr. Patel emerged a moment later, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Mrs. Wilkins, what? How dare you?" Karen interrupted, her voice shrill and accusatory. "How dare you get me thrown in jail, you despicable little man?" Mr. Patel blinked, taken aback by the venom in her tone. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilkins, but I don't understand what you're talking about. I didn't do anything to get you. Don't play dumb with me." Karen spat, her eyes narrowing to slits. "I know it was you who called the police on me, you sniveling little coward. And now, thanks to you, I've spent the last month rotting in a cell." Mr. Patel held up his hands, his expression placating. "Mrs. Wilkins, I assure you, I had nothing to do with that. The police officer who came to speak with me said that you were the one mo." "Liar!" Karen shrieked, her voice carrying down the street. "You're all in on it, aren't you? You and that cop, and probably the whole damn neighborhood, too. Well, I'm not going to stand for it anymore." With that, she turned on her heel and began stalking back towards her car, her movements jerky and agitated. I watched in stunned silence, my heart pounding in my chest, as she yanked open the driver's side door and climbed inside. The engine roared to life, and a moment later, the car lurched forward, headed straight for Mr. Patel's sit-in. I let out a horrified gasp, my body tensing in anticipation of the impending collision. But just as Karen's car was about to make impact, a familiar figure stepped out from behind a parked van, his hand reaching for his hip. I felt a surge of relief as I recognized the crisp police uniform and the stern expression on the officer's face. "Mrs. Wilkins, stop," the officer shouted, his voice booming across the street. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am, and keep your hands where I can see them." Karen froze, her eyes wide with terror. She slowly raised her hands, trembling, as the officer strode towards her, his gaze never wavering. "I thought I made it clear the last time that I wouldn't tolerate any more of your antics," the officer growled, his voice low and menacing. "Apparently, you just can't learn your lesson." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. She simply stared at the officer, her face a mask of pure fear. The officer shook his head, his lips curling into a humorless smile. "Well, I guess it's time for a refresher course, then. This time, I think we'll make it a little longer than a month, don't you?" With that, he reached for his handcuffs, and Karen let out a strangled cry. "No, please. I'll behave, I swear." But the officer didn't seem to be in a listening mood. He swiftly cuffed Karen's wrists and began leading her towards his squad car, leaving Mr. Patel and me staring in stunned silence. As the car pulled away, its sirens blaring, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. Maybe, just maybe, this would finally be the lesson that Karen needed to learn, that she couldn't keep meddling in other people's business without facing the consequences. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder how long the peace would last this time. After all, with someone as stubborn and determined as Karen Wilkins, the battle was far from over. As the squad car carrying a handcuffed Karen Wilkins disappeared down the street, a heavy silence settled over the neighborhood. Mr. Patel and I stood there, exchanging a glance that said more than words ever could. "Well, I suppose that's one way to put an end to her antics," Mr. Patel finally said, his voice tinged with a hint of weariness. I nodded, my brow furrowing as I considered the implications of what had just transpired. I can't help but feel a little sorry for her, to be honest. I mean, she's obviously got some issues, to say the least. Mr. Patel sighed, his expression softening. Yes, that's true. But that doesn't excuse the harm she's caused, both to herself and to others. Sometimes, people like Karen need a firm hand to guide them back onto the right path. I couldn't help but nod in agreement. I suppose you're right. Still, I can't help but wonder what's going to happen to her now. I mean, how long do you think she'll be in jail this time? Mr. Patel shrugged, his gaze drifting back to his car, which sat unperturbed on the curb. I'm not sure. The officer didn't specify, but given the seriousness of the charges, I imagine it will be more than just a month. I grimaced, thinking of the possible consequences Karen might face. Do you think she'll ever learn her lesson? Or is this just going to be a never-ending cycle of her causing trouble and then getting hauled off to jail? Mr. Patel paused, his brow furrowing in thought. That's a good question, my friend. Ultimately, it will depend on Karen herself, whether she's willing to take this experience to heart and make a genuine effort to change her ways. I chewed on my bottom lip, mulling over his words. But what if she doesn't? What if she just keeps right on causing trouble, even after this? Mr. Patel offered me a small, sympathetic smile. Then I suppose the authorities will have to find a way to ensure that she can no longer disrupt the peace of this neighborhood. Sometimes, the only way to address a persistent problem is through more permanent means. I felt a chill run down my spine at the implication in his words. You don't mean? Mr. Patel held up a hand, shaking his head. No, of course not. I'm not suggesting anything so drastic. But there are other ways to ensure that someone like Karen is prevented from continuing to cause harm. Through stricter probation, court-ordered counseling, or even more extensive jail time, if necessary. I let out a relieved breath, nodding slowly. I see. Well, I suppose that's a bit more palatable than the alternative. Mr. Patel chuckled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with amusement. Indeed. And I have a feeling that the authorities are more than willing to explore those options, if it means finally putting an end to Karen's reign of terror. We both fell silent, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. I couldn't help but wonder what the future held, not just for Karen, but for the entire neighborhood. Would we finally be able to live in peace, free from her constant meddling? Or was this just the calm before the storm? Only time would tell, I supposed. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, it was bound to be a wild ride. In the weeks that followed Karen's second arrest, the neighborhood settled into an uneasy sense of calm. It was as if we were all collectively holding our breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Mr. Patel, for his part, seemed to be taking the whole ordeal in stride. He continued his daily routine, his old sedan still parked in its usual spot, as if nothing out of the ordinary had transpired. I, on the other hand, found myself constantly on edge, jumping at the slightest sound or movement. I couldn't help but wonder if Karen would somehow manage to escape her latest stint in jail and come barreling back down the street, ready to unleash her wrath on the unsuspecting neighborhood. Then, one sunny afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, I heard the familiar rumble of a police car in the distance. I froze, my heart racing, as the vehicle drew closer and closer. But to my surprise, the car didn't slow down as it passed Mr. Patel's house. Instead, it kept going, its sirens blaring as it disappeared around the corner. I let out a long, shaky breath, my shoulders sagging with relief. Perhaps Karen had finally learned her lesson and would stay away for good. But just as I was beginning to relax, I heard the sound of car doors slamming, followed by the unmistakable click of shoes on the sidewalk. I turned to see a familiar figure striding towards me, her expression a mix of determination and barely contained rage. It was Karen, and she was back. "You!" she spat, her eyes narrowing as she pointed an accusatory finger in my direction. "I know you got something to do with this, you sneaky little worm." I blinked, taken aback by the sheer venom in her voice. I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, holding up my hands in a gesture of surrender. "Don't play dumb with me," Karen shouted, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "I know you and that Patel fellow are in cahoots, trying to get me locked up for good." I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could get a word out, the sound of a car engine roaring to life caught our attention. We both turned to see Mr. Patel's sedan pulling out of its spot, its tires squealing as it sped down the street. Karen's eyes widened, and a triumphant grin spread across her face. "Aha! I knew it. He's trying to run, the coward." Without a moment's hesitation, she darted towards her own car, yanking open the driver's side door and hopping inside. The engine roared to life, and a moment later, she was tearing down the street, her car easily keeping pace with Mr. Patel's. I stood there, frozen in horror, as the two vehicles disappeared around the corner. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had Mr. Patel finally snapped and decided to flee? And what would happen if Karen caught up to him? I didn't have long to ponder these questions, however, as the sound of sirens once again filled the air. I whirled around to see a squad car racing down the street, its lights flashing. The officer behind the wheel was the same one who had arrested Karen twice before, and his expression was one of grim determination. "Stay back, sir," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the wail of the sirens. "We've got a pursuit in progress, and it's about to get ugly." I watched, my heart pounding in my chest, as the officer gunned the engine and sped off, his car quickly disappearing from view. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my hands trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. What had started as a simple neighborly dispute had escalated into a full-blown chase, and I couldn't help but wonder how it would all end. Would Mr. Patel manage to outrun Karen and the police? Or would he finally be caught, his fate sealed by the relentless pursuit of a woman who seemed hell-bent on destroying him? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. This was far from the end of the Karen incident. The battle lines had been drawn, and the war was about to reach its climactic conclusion.